Welcome to EdScoop TV. I'm Wyatt Kash, and I'm here today with Janice Mertes. Janice is the Assistant Director of Instructional Media Technology and Digital Learning for the Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction. Welcome to the program.
Thank you.
So we're here at the State Education Technology Director Association's Annual Leadership Summit, and I know one of the areas that you're very involved in is the topic of open resources and digital instruction materials. Tell us a little about, number one, what you're doing in the state of Wisconsin in that area.
As many other states are facing, as districts are shifting to one-to-one devices or trying to leverage 24/7 access of students to resources, we are, first of all, taking a proactive stance with districts and how do we integrate best planning around this, that curriculum and learning objects come first before devices. We're looking at the spectrum from proprietary licensed materials all the way to open ed and everything in between. So there's a lot of collaboration around states around the idea of what are good education resources, how do you curate them, teacher-created resources and professional learning. And we're trying to figure out what content could be traded between states, but also the ecosystem to allow that to happen. So what's the meta tagging component? Again, how do teachers potentially search by standards? So this shift is really encompassing of a kind of a digital ecosystem. And as a state, are we helping to promote that, understand it, but then also how those resources integrate? So there's really a huge technical component to it, but then also what is high quality instructional materials and leveraging some standard rubrics around that selection and review of high content materials. And there's really kind of this issue that they're aligned to standards. We're trying to get to the point of how do you figure out what are the most effective resources for students. But we're also looking at educators as designers, meaning that they can mix and match licensed content, open content, teacher-created content, and really try and move towards student-created content. And it's starting to come in all forms. Digital content is not just a PDF of something. Digital content also has to be potentially games for students and creation options and interactive engagement simulations online. So we're seeing a lot more development around these type of resources and how do we help make districts and teachers aware that they can integrate them in successfully to traditional curriculum.
That's exciting. Thinking about the teachers first, and I'd like to follow up on the students. What technology platforms or repositories or other systems are you using to try to help just teachers cope with the flood of open materials? How do you vet that or help them vet that? And how do you just make the job easier for teachers?
You know, it's always funny. The standard line is just Google that. But the reality is finding high quality instructional resources is a little more difficult in the sense of there already are curated areas, and we've got some great national resources that are really aligning to this methodology. The National Archives, and there's the new Digital Public Library that's putting all these state resources together and primary resources. So the idea is that how do we capture and let students or teachers know about just what's available in digital format from these great resources, but also then there may be things that are being shared or uploaded. So we want to try to move teachers beyond the teacher-pay-teacher kind of conundrum that was occurring and say how do teachers collaborate, and some organizations are really doing a good job of partnering with teacher groups to create high-level quality lessons. And between the states, we're trying to figure out how do we kind of get an inventory of some of those resources, but also then from a platform perspective, it should be platform agnostic, meaning that how do we let content flow in and out and kind of vetted through various state standards and then get it down to our local district level.
And you mentioned students are contributing content. Tell me a little about that, and is there kind of, again, a technology platform or that facilitates that surface to teachers throughout your state?
We're starting to see, I think, some emergence of the need to count high quality content as also a process of content creation, and that means what are students doing to create content. We have students that are engaging in coding activities that actually produce games and apps. We're in the multimedia era where YouTube is the biggest repository that exists, and schools have to figure out that fine line of appropriate filtering and access for students. But the creation part of what students can do, I think, is probably the most exciting time we have right now in education, because technology hardware is getting more affordable, devices are plentiful, but also the information literacy technology component of what's being modeled and expected. Students can kind of take on that role of creator. And again, they're creating the evidence of what they're learning. So teachers are also becoming the facilitator of the process of doing that, not necessarily saying, look at these resources, find some answers, and just put them on and move on. So students are engaged in creating that new knowledge, which we find essential for the next wave of what students are going to have to do in the workplace. They're going to have to be agile, they're going to have to create, they're going to have to communicate. We want them to be creative and we want them to be collaborative. But again, they're creators of new knowledge and explaining that to the world. And I think never before have we seen such a strong student voice in education and calling for that ability to allow students to really engage in the learning process.
Talk to me a little about how all this is impacting the world of licensed content producers and traditional education publishers. How are they adapting to this sort of wide open landscape?
I'd say sometimes it's really dependent on subject area too. I think schools are, if you look at the traditional literacy, ELA, mathematics, that's very scope and sequenced curriculum. Yes. I think that's where licensed content still is going to have a pretty strong role. But we look at like the next gen science standards, and the reality is there aren't materials yet maybe available for a pure scope and sequence. We know the world of publishing is changing in the sense of the number of publishers, the number of big publishers. I saw recently from a publisher, they're advertising not a textbook, but a tech book, meaning that content is coming through in different formats. It's not the flip PDF of a textbook, but it's modular units of content, it's mix or match, it's interactive with videos. So the idea that the UDL principles of seeing content in different formats, I think, is resonating, that students can manipulate content, they can look at extra content for remediation, but that it's different. It's simulations, it's games, it's still high-level reading. But again, if we're putting this in student devices, how are students engaging with the content? I think that's the driver of publishers right now, is the student engagement with the content and the ability to select and choose what content you need. So we hear a lot about the modular concept of content. We hear about this flexible content. And for districts, I mean, this is creating different purchasing models. I want this module, I want this, I don't want the whole series. So, from when I started teaching in the 1990s to what I see now with publishers, it's very different. And publishers are engaging school districts and teachers in trying to understand this. But again, I think from the student perspective, we're seeing the issues of what's the adaptive part of learning, where are the assessments built in within these materials for rapid fire assessments, and districts are making choices what they choose to purchase or whether they create their own. Never before have districts had so many tools at their hands as far as the ability to create and scaffold content, off a learning management system with open ed resources. So I'd say there's no right answer to say what's going on, but it is interesting how it's kind of morphing into a new world.
Interesting. Well, all this depends on good broadband. Tell me a little about what's happening in Wisconsin relative to the ability to equip schools with adequate broadband and also help those students have broadband access at home, and maybe some innovative things that Wisconsin's doing to try to help close the homework gap.
Sure. So Wisconsin, I'd say broadband, like many other states, is not just a school issue or our agency issue. It's a multifaceted, really becoming a private-public partnership issue. I'd say it's 100% a bipartisan issue, just like we've seen the changes at the national level. And the awareness of under E-rate modernization down to the state level. So in Wisconsin, the governor recently signed a new BadgerNet contract, which is a statewide network that many of our schools participate in. We also have some different structures as far as community area networks and some other providers. They're trying to figure this out together to make it affordable, but also the awareness of what the states can take advantage of from the federal level. We're doing a lot with technical support to schools around Category 2, and really they call that modernization. Just like many other states, half of Wisconsin is rural. and more than half of our schools are considered small schools, less than 900 students. So you look at the geographic space, accessible broadband to rural areas has been a driver and has gotten additional funding from the state. That also means those areas are also, some of them are further ahead in trying to figure out the digital homework gap, because there are issues about what's available at school versus at home. And there's no right or wrong reason. It could be just the road you live on and it's not accessible. And that's in some of our, southeast and suburban areas where it just happens to be where your house is located, versus then the driver of some of the socioeconomic issues and then total lack of access. So we're aware of all those kind of triangulated factors, and schools are really digging into some of the data about what's available to students and surveying students or families. Some schools are getting creative with kind of take a hotspot home program. The schools that are going one-to-one, I think, again, from their planning perspective, they have to think about that. We use the term digitally inclusive communities, meaning where else in a community can you get access? You hear the stories where students are staying after school, or families are coming within radius of the school network. One of the things right now they're talking about the national level is if E-rate dollars could extend to off-school grounds access, which would include home access devices, hotspots, or we do have an innovative program. One of our professors at UW-Madison created a Wi-Fi for buses, and it routes through the safe network provider from the school district into the buses, and then students will have that access. Again, in rural areas, bus time might be hour and 15 minutes. And that's been really successful. And again, we're trying to figure out from a dollar perspective how to help offset and fund that for districts. So I'd say from a collaborative perspective, there's a lot of regional discussion. We are in the process of releasing a new state digital learning plan, and network hardware broadband is a specific target area of that. So we're also identifying what we can do at the state level, but what local districts may choose to do. But the dialogue crosses, again, more than just our ed agency. And that's exciting to realize that everyone's trying to come together, whether the discussion is economic development, the real estate group, or even just schools. And we also have the public library division. So recognizing that public libraries are becoming important components of school access within communities.
Sounds like there's a lot going on there.
A lot going on, just like other states.
Yeah. Lastly, in terms of sort of technology, more specifically, we hear a lot about virtual reality devices. We hear a lot about 3D printing and so forth. What technology developments are you focusing on in the coming year or two that you think will be either game changers or really enablers for schools that you're excited about?
And I think about that in two ways. One is what students are doing, and the other is the programming perspective. So from a programming perspective, even though we're local control, we do a lot of collaboration with partners around what's kind of next for instruction. And we have some blended learning initiatives going on for districts to really dive in what is blended learning. We've got video-enabled classrooms, virtual school enhanced learning, but that's really how are we equitably giving opportunities to students in some of the higher grades for access to courses. But then from, I'd say, kind of the elementary up level, all of a sudden comes the maker spaces and the coding. So we are one of the states, like many others, looking to adopt computer science standards moving forward. But we're saying, what does that K-12 spectrum of that look like? What's the computational part of early elementary? So the sheer number of kids that are engaging in coding, which really can go off into a lot of different directions. But it's also just that emergence of students engaging in it. We've had some exposure to virtual reality. We'll see where that kind of ends up. But again, some of the textbook publishers are adding on curriculum materials around, like Google Expedition, some of those things. So I think what's really exciting is that we have just really fabulous teachers and schools that want to kind of be on that innovative cutting edge and just try things out. And I think, we've got a lot of gaming programming going on, not only from game development, but also then participation and how does it integrate within the curriculum. So from an overall perspective, again, we just want to give the access to resources, and we're working on really crowdsourcing those resources within our district, but also leveraging our regional support networks to make sure that teachers are aware of it. So I always look at the program every year for the technology conference and see what's kind of the emerging topic. But it is really school districts learning from each other and again, leveraging those resources. So I think when I look at the Horizon report and they say what's kind of coming, I'd say half of those are possible and affordable to schools. Half are still kind of in the emerging. But again, I think because of the web to me is the great equalizer. There are so many resources that are available to students, and again, from the device price point, it makes it possible to think about these opportunities more thoughtfully than maybe we have before.
That sounds like an exciting time to be a technology and media director. Yeah. Well, Janice Mertes, thank you so much for being with us and sharing some of the things that are going on in Wisconsin.
Yep, thank you.
I'm Wyatt Kash with EdScoop TV. Thanks for being with us, and look for more of our coverage at edscoop.com.